the last time I saw him, he spoke so movingly about being in Newark and listening hour after hour after hour as people told their stories of being abused by the housing system there. And what he learned, not from the lawyers, not from the lobbyists, but from sitting and hearing people tell their own stories about what's happened to them. Senator Booker, thank you for your leadership, and thank you for caring. We are truly happy to welcome you today.
I was really excited about coming here, not just to be in the presence of the honorees and under the auspices of an organization that is exalting some of those pivotal values, not of our nation, but really some of the most critical values of our world right now. But I was really excited to be here because I wanted to be in community with you. These are difficult times. These are despairing times. These are times where you are sobered by the gravity of the challenges and where your heart, if it is human, is broken. I tell people this all the time: if America hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. We are in a nation where we're seeing heartbreaks that should not happen in a nation this great. I remember Congress ago where we were able to expand the child tax credit. It's an arcane aspect of tax law, but I was so excited to be invited by Senators Bennett and Senators Brown to be a part of this coalition that literally could cut the poverty rates for children in our country in half. And what was extraordinary about that experience for me is when the elections were won by Ossoff and Warnock in Georgia, we knew that we had the numbers in the Senate to get that policy potentially passed. And we were able to do it, but we were one vote shy of getting it to be permanent. But over that 1 year, indeed, poverty was almost cut, child poverty was almost cut by a year in our country. And I was so excited about that, but so devastatingly upset that it was only for a year. And what happened was unbelievable. We invite stories, we invite our constituents to tell us stories about how their lives are affected by the policies, good or bad, that we make, and we get such moving stories. I'm the only United States Senator that lives in a community at or below the poverty line. It's a black and brown community where we don't mistake wealth with worth. But what that did for people in my community, the transformative change, really made it feel to me like we had done one of the greatest accomplishments the United States Senate has done in total in generations, but it was only 1 year. And what was extraordinary to me was that after that year, we slipped back into having high child poverty rates. I remember I was talking about the moral violence of child poverty, the obscenity of child poverty. Literally, they looked at the brain activity of children who were pulled above the child poverty line, and how the cortisol levels that constantly shoot in the brain of the insecurity, that literally you saw different brain development. Poverty has a physical impact. That's why I call it moral violence on children. But for me, it proved this one thing overall, that in our nation, child poverty is not an inevitable conclusion, an inevitable happening. It is a policy choice. The wealthiest nation in the world can actually eradicate poverty, could empower our children to have all the food they need to nourish their bodies, the schools and the education they need to develop their genius. They can have a nation that welcomes their gifts, celebrates their successes, and empowers the difference that they can make. But little did I know that I would go from trying to advance the cause of this country to being in a time when the very programs that I see and witness with my own eyes would be under such attack. From Meals on Wheels for the seniors to WIC for children and infants, for programs like food stamps. where the average American stays on it for maybe less than 2 years, whereas the bridge, I would see these programs under attack in a bill that would literally gut and cut programs that are our safety net, that empower so many working families to make it through difficult times, all while giving the wealthiest amongst us bigger tax cuts. And so I was excited to come here today to be in community with people and to be before the 3 honorees of folks who know what it means to stand up and be truth tellers in difficult times. I have a chill of fear in this country that's making law firms go to heel to the President of the United States because of the clients they represented and paying their tribute to dear leader. The fears on our campuses that have friends of mine telling me that there are some people during orientations that are telling students, be careful what you say and what you post. Literally in the cradles of democracy and freedom of expression, they're being told to censor themselves. I'm seeing arrests of a sitting judge, arrest of a mayor of my city, arrest of the congressperson who represents me. I'm seeing people being disappeared off of our streets without due process. All of these things chill my heart and break it. And so I wanted to be in community, perhaps to let you know what I think is a truth. That we in this nation share values. I read a famous speech at one point from around the time of the Civil War where someone challenged others, do we have a government or are we a nation? In other words, the government in the United States is a wonderful set of rules, our Constitution and the rule of law. I swore an oath to defend it, but that does not make a nation. A nation is a shared commitment to ideals. It is shared values and shared virtues. It is a civic gospel to which we all aspire. Regardless of the party, we hold certain truths to be self-evident. That, to me, is the challenge now, where we are replacing a civic virtue with cruelty, with winner take all, with win at any costs. And it made me think about other periods in our country, because I don't think anything we're seeing now is unprecedented. It is very, very precedented. We are seeing now moments in this day and age that are echoed from our history. And one of the times as a senator I think about a lot is when this nation was looking towards the Senate during the time of the 1950s. When huge battles were happening here, one around civil rights and one around the Red Scare and communism. It was a time that, like the leaders behind me, we saw more and more courageous people willing to stand up at great peril to themselves and tell the truth. I brought my reading glasses because I am getting old, not in Senate years, I'm very young. But I love this speech by Margaret Chase Smith. She called it the Declaration of Conscience. She got so much hate after she gave this speech, attacks, challenges, but yet she stood true as a Republican. She said the Democratic administration has greatly lost the confidence of the American people by its complacency to the threat of communism and the leak of vital secrets to Russia. She doesn't candy coat her criticisms of Democrats, talking about the proved cases where this has happened and the seriousness of them. And she believes that the Republican Party was standing on principle, but yet she says to displace it, and I'm quoting her now, to replace the Democratic Party with a Republican regime embracing a philosophy that lacks political integrity or intellectual honesty would prove equally disastrous to the nation. The nation sorely needs a Republican victory, I confess, but I don't want to see the Republican Party ride to political victory on the 4 horsemen of calumny: fear, ignorance, bigotry, and smear. I doubt if the Republican Party could, simply because I don't believe the American people will uphold any political party that puts political exploitation above the national interest. I see that her words then, as urgent then, are prescient now. I love what Edward R. Murrow, a man in a different sector, said at this same time, "No one familiar with the history of this country can deny that congressional committees are useful. It is necessary to investigate before legislating, but the line between investigation and persecuting is a very fine one, and the junior senator from Wisconsin has stepped over it repeatedly. His primary achievement has been in confusing the public mind as between the internal and external threats of communism. We must not confuse dissent with loyalty. We must remember always that accusation is not proof, and that what conviction depends upon evidence and the due process of law. We will not walk in fear. We will not walk in fear of one another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason. If we dig deep in our history and our doctrine and remember that we are not descended from fearful men, not from men who fear to write, to speak, to associate, and defend the causes that were, for the moment, unpopular. We are all descendants from men and women who stood when it was unpopular, who stood when it was dangerous, who spoke truth in a climate of lies, who sacrificed political position for a more patriotic purpose. We are here today because of that kind of courage, not because of the absence of fear. Fear is necessary for courage. You cannot have great courage without great fear. Not because people were not despairing like we all are, because you cannot have great hope without great despair. In fact, hope is the active conviction that despair will never have the last word. This time in the 50s and the 60s, I've been reading more and more about the courage of individuals to stand before powerful forces of money and political position, to stand up and tell their truth. Sometimes they did it in silence, just standing up to register voters willing to die together like Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, black and white, Christian and Jude, bound not by the same religion, but by the same civic virtue. In our nation's history, there has not been a generation that has not faced demagoguery and hate, that has not faced people rising in power with the attempts to suppress the minority. There has not been a time that the constitutional principles of this country didn't have to be challenged in their defense. It's the reason why everyone from Martin Luther King at the March on Washington to Susan B. Anthony constantly called to the ideals of this nation like a debt that was coming to be paid, to live up to our values, like the great Langston Hughes stood in defiance and said, "America never was America to me, and yet I swear this oath, America will be." So today we celebrate those people who stand in the storm when it is neither safe or convenient, who stand in the storm when our nation needs more truth tellers, who stand in the storm and don't simply curse the darkness, but show us a way, show us a light. We cannot be defined by what we're against. We need to be steadfast in what we stand for. And in this nation, founded in an extraordinary way by imperfect geniuses who our founding documents are littered with those bigotries of the past. Native Americans referred to as savages, blacks, fractions of human beings, women not mentioned at all, but these imperfect geniuses wrestled with the ideas of virtue in hopes that they, as imperfect as they are, read Washington's farewell address, as imperfect as they are, as much as history would see with more clarity their faults, they hoped something would endure in this nation, and it starts with us understanding that we belong to each other. That when your children suffer, my children are affected. That we share interwoven destinies, that we share a connection. That yes, we are a nation that celebrates rugged individualism and self-reliance, but we know that the truth of this nation is calls to a higher purpose of how we treat each other, how we see each other, how we pledge ourselves to each other. Those founding documents at the end of the Declaration of Independence is a declaration of interdependence. These imperfect geniuses knew that this nation could not survive unless we didn't just establish a government, that we actually established that civic gospel. And it starts with an understanding of the basic rights of humanity, but it goes further than that. We declared that we would be special to each other, that we would commit ourselves to each other, that we would be each other's magnitude and bond by saying in the last words that we must mutually pledge. If we're going to make this thing work, we must mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Today we celebrate that spirit that hasn't been snuffed from our land ever. A spirit we find in the low places and the high, the crooked places and the straight. A spirit that thrives in this country and is our only hope right now. Heroes who are willing to stand in the storm and commit themselves one to another. We need to be speaking more of character. We need to be speaking more of sacred honor. We need to be seeking more of our bond, that we belong to each other, that the hope of this nation lies in how we treat one another. And that's how I want to end. I speak with spirit, but let me get it to the practical. I had many tests in my journey of leadership. I've had good days and bad days, days I've lived up to the example I want to set, because leadership is not a title or a position. It is action and example. It's how you live every day. And in times of trial, I try to stand up even more. But the trial I want to tell you about is not a metaphoric storm where people are trying to sweep away our constitutional principles, sweep away our separation of powers, sweep away our fundamental rights and guarantees like due process and freedom of speech. But this was a real storm of epic proportions called Hurricane Sandy. And it was visiting upon the state of New Jersey. And I am the mayor of the largest city. We would lose people in this storm. My team was operating like a symphony. Oh, how they were extraordinary, preparing for the storm. I made not mandatory lockdowns for folks or mandatory stay-at-home orders, but I implored upon people, this is not a time to be out. But I went out in the last minutes before the storm hit in a command vehicle driven by 2 police officers in hopes that I would give one last survey. I saw some cars out. I would flash the lights, roll down the window and say, please get home. It is not safe to be out. As we were driving along, looking for conditions that I would have to alert security to take note of so we can go back and alleviate them. As I'm driving along a long stretch, I get a phone call. Forgive me if this sounds impertinent, but the phone call began with what I believe is the stupidest question in America. Now, you all can be judge of this, please. If I am right, if I'm being overstating the fact, but I believed at the time this was the stupidest question in America. I get a phone call, and I answer my cell phone, and the person on the other side says, hello, this is the White House operator, here's the question. Would you hold for the President of the United States? I'm like, who says no to that question? I don't care who you are in America. I mean, I'm washing my hair. No, of course, I will hold for the President of the United States. And the next voice I hear, I tell you right now, I miss Obama. And I miss her husband too, but I really miss Michelle. And this may sound outrageous. This is going to make it to social media. Somebody's going to clip this and get me in trouble, but I believe fundamentally that if she married me, I'd be president right now. So I answer the phone, and it is Michelle's husband calling me from the Oval Office in an act of grace. Here is the President of the United States checking in on people in New Jersey to see how they're doing, and the conversation is meaningful. It may have been just 5 or 7 minutes, but my spirit was lifted. This is what a commander-in-chief should do. Not try to inspire fear, but to try to comfort folks who are afflicted. You have nothing to fear but fear itself. How can I be a spirit that strengthens, that unites, that encourages? It was a powerful moment. I hung up the phone, and the next thing I know, my cell phone rings again, as if these 2 men planned it, but they didn't. I answer my cell phone, no question. It's just the governor of my state, a man you all probably never heard of, very humble, very quiet. His name's Chris Christie at the time. And he was my friend then, he is my friend now. And moments like this should sear away partisanship. We too talked, affirming our humanity and dignity and the gravity of the moment, talked about plans and practicalities, but two men also gave each other strength and spirit, knowing that what would affect our state would be profound in its tragedies. I hang up the phone with him, and now we're heading up this hill, and I look in the distance, and I see through the rain and the wind and the darkness a light being swung back and forth, and I strain to see more, and now I see it's a man swinging that light, and behind him, all the trees at the apex of the hill had come tearing down by the wind and the rain, and they had pulled down all the wires and the telephone poles. It was a mess of wire and wood, and as we get closer, I see that the man is wearing a yellow slicker, and he's an elderly man standing in this storm in violation of what I encourage people to be locked down during this crisis. And my officers roll me right in front of him, and I roll down the window, and I say to this man, forgive me, I yelled at this man, "What are you doing out here?" And then he looks at me like I just asked him the stupidest question in America. He points at the tangled wire and shattered wood and says to me, Mayor, this is so dangerous. I'm standing out here to make sure no one comes along and gets hurt. I had just talked to the President of the United States of America. I had just talked to the governor of my state. I'm the mayor of the largest city. But for the rest of my life, I know that the greatness I best saw exhibited on that night was not a person in high position or with a fancy title. It was an American in a storm, in dark of night, in savage wind and rain, who stood upon the hill and held up his light to serve other Americans. He stood with honor, he stood with courage, he stood with a commitment to others as reflected in our founding documents. I pledge to you my life, my fortune, and my sacred honor. We are in a storm right now in America. It is a moral storm, but like that man in a storm who stood, the question now is not what are they doing, it is how are we going to stand? Will we stand for unity because there is no us and them in America, it is just us? Will we stand for our constitutional principles because if we lose them, we go into tyranny? Where will we stand? Will we stand in this fight? Will we let our voices be heard even if they shake? Will we stand strong even if our knees are weak? How will we stand? And I believe if we stand like that, we'll inspire others to stand too, to stand with us. I believe that if we stand like this, then we won't just deal with the darkness now, we will bring on a new light and a new hope. In so many chapters of our country, it was always darkest before the dawn. I believe our ancestors are watching us. And if we stand, we will answer the call of our country. As black folks and white folks and the Rainbow Coalition did before, we will make real their song that we shall overcome. Thank you.